further one and the most hidden, but you made it, so round of applause to you for being here. Um, my name is Carolina Murphy. I work with CECP. I'm the Director of Advisory. Anybody here familiar with the advisory services within CECP by any chance? Awesome. Well, we will talk about it later. But no further ado, I would love to introduce you to our panelists. First of all, Shannon McNary, Manager of Public Affairs and Corporate Citizenship at CITGO. David Etzwiler, CEO of the Siemens Foundation. And Tia Hodges, President and CEO of the MetLife Foundation. We're honored to have you here. Thank you for coming and joining our panel. Today's agenda, it's basically the welcome, overview of CECP frameworks, a quick example of a pulse survey, community investment research. Then we will open to panel discussion and how leaders direct social impact funding, environmental focus areas and programs, cross enterprise work, as well as current trends in climate action, sustainability related giving, and predictions, which I guess is the most fun part. Then there will be an audience Q&A. Hopefully we'll have enough time. A small table discussion, which should be a lot of fun too for those of you that are practitioners, and closing remarks. As you all know, CCP does a lot of research and annual reports, and you might be familiar with some of them. Anybody has read any of those research reports or worked with giving numbers? Awesome. Well, and as you know, you currently direct, if you currently work, do you currently do direct social impact or charitable funding to environmental related causes? Does your organization get involved with that? Awesome. How about collaborating cross-enterprise way to determine the focus of these investments? Do you do that as well? Awesome. So if you do community investment, it's for you. And this session is a good fit. As you might know, giving numbers, anybody saw Sarah's presentation a few minutes ago downstairs about environmental giving, how the numbers have doubled, which is good news for those of us that are in this field. As you might know, CCP also has a new framework that's called the Integrated Long-Term Disclosure Assessment. Has anybody here seen this before? That's at the CEO level, and some companies have done. Matter of fact, Barbara presented on it last year at CIF, which is our CEO Investor Forum. This is really helpful because there are 11 sub-teams, basically 11 pillars, climate being one of them, as you might see on the bottom, human capital management, operational ecosystem, climate risk, which is really important to our investors, as well as biodiversity. Why I'm bringing that up? Because we highly encourage a CEO to work with us to develop his for your company. And why? Because that's a 5-year framework. So that should really help your jobs from a sense that that's a 5-year strategic plan that helps you foresee how your company is planning to deliver on all those pillars, as well as other areas such as corporate governance, corporate purpose, risk opportunities. So I highly encourage you to think about it. Another example of where we can engage more with your companies is the pulse surveys. Has anybody here done a pulse survey? Okay. There are weekly questions that we send to a broad network of our affiliates. Pretty much any person in your company can have access to. And that's an example of a pulse survey that we did about Scope 3 emissions and net zero commitments. And of course, the responses were different between North America and Europe, which is kind of interesting too. We have a chance to see regional differences, not necessarily, we don't know which company said what, but we know which region said what. And with that said, I would like to start our panel and ask the first question of the day, which is a question to all. Also, the chance for you to introduce yourself, please, if you like. Shannon.
Hi, thanks for giving me the opportunity, CCP, and to join this great panel. I also hope to learn a lot. So my name is Shannon McNary, Manager for Public Affairs and Corporate Citizenship at CITGO Petroleum. We are an oil refiner and marketer, and we are based in Houston. And just to sort of level set a little bit, context means everything. We're privately held, which matters, and we have around 3,500 employees.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. David Etzwiler. I'm the CEO of the Siemens Foundation. Siemens is a German company with a strong presence here in the U.S. And relevant to today's conversation, we're in a lot of sort of clean economy sector positions. So if you look at what we do in rail, we've got electric locomotives for Amtrak and streetcars. We have EV chargers for the Ford F-150, but also for fleet charging in buses and trucks. Software that we work with automobile manufacturers, including EV manufacturers, to set up lines and sort of make sure their supply chain and their manufacturing moves through. We're in healthcare. Our healthcare diagnostics and imaging teams are also producing lower emissions products as well. So across the board, about 90% of our products are really aligned with the green economy.
Good morning, everyone. I almost feel like we should have this outside since it's so beautiful. So I hope you all get a chance to enjoy the weather while here. Tia Hodges, I lead MetLife Foundation, head of corporate giving, employee engagement, and volunteerism. I have a fantastic team of 9, and we do grant making globally, about $40 million a year, plus impact investments, and engage employees through volunteerism and other efforts. We have 3 main portfolios. So we evolved our strategy largely from financial health to focus on not only financial health, but economic inclusion, and a portfolio we call resilient communities. So think jobs, managing your and building your finances and preserving for wealth, and then also building resiliency. And part of that is a commitment to environmental causes. So we have a 10-year, $10 million commitment to environmental causes, but also looking at our work, which I may comment on later, I think, on how environment is impacting both the financial health, well-being, safety of the communities that we're serving, not just in the U.S., but globally. I think we're seeing that real time. So it's a real honor to be here with all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you for coming. Thank you all for joining us. With that said, my first question is to all of you. If you want to skip, please go ahead. How does all this network and frameworks fit into your strategy, especially with regards to community investment?
I would say a couple of things. So MetLife is global, and MetLife Foundation's work is global. We have about 45,000 employees and around the globe. And we really worked, I think, diligently to think about how does our strategy, but in particular, how does our work around the environment and sustainability align with our sustainability team and align with other core values and purpose and mission of the organization, once again, not just in the U.S., but also globally. So when we reworked our strategy, we were really intentional on thinking about what is the sustainability team working on, what matters to MetLife. That also includes MetLife Investment Management as well. What are some of the impact investments that we are doing, and how does our work from a philanthropic standpoint align to the business, and where can we not only align but integrate some of that work into the philanthropic giving that we're doing as well for communities around the globe. So that was a strategic push initiative. We also have at MetLife a 2030 DEI goals, and that is across the enterprise, with the foundation being one aspect of that. And that also includes our DEI team, and it also includes MetLife Investment Management. It includes our sustainability team, are all contributing to the alignment with the UN SDG goals, but also looking at how some of our support for environmental causes can have a positive impact. And I also, finally, I mentioned the 10-year, $10 million investment in environmental causes. That was before I arrived at MetLife Foundation, but it was really with the purview of understanding that our environment obviously plays a significant role in the lives of our communities. We don't just live in silos. So any type of impact, no matter where in the globe, is going to have ripple effects in aspects of our lives, whether that's from tree plantings to water, clean access to clean water, to also integrating that work with entrepreneurship, making sure lands in the Amazon and communities that are indigenous to that work also have lands that they can work with and develop an entrepreneurial business that is successful. So you start to look at that integration. So I would say that's a high level overview. I'm happy to go in specifics during the table portion of this convening.
That's great. Please go ahead, David.
Yeah, so I would say, probably some similar themes in terms of approach to the strategy. Although what I oversee is the philanthropy for Siemens USA, but our approach 10 years ago was really to back up and ask, where's the highest return on investment that we can provide to society? And we did that. We sort of looked at, unpacked a overlapping 3-circle diagram with our board of directors and our influencers in the company, and looked at sort of the big issues of the day: wealth and income disparities, the need for more trained workers in the U.S., and that whole opportunity in the midst of that space, and sort of what equity was doing in our democracy to our democracy was sort of the big social impact circle that we got focused on. And then we swung over and looked at the assets of the company and said, okay, yes, we have dollars, but what else do we have? Well, we've got the German models of work-based learning, of pre-apprenticeship, of apprenticeship. These are great equity drivers in other countries. They could be a greater driver here in the U.S. We looked at our executives, many of whom came up through those apprenticeship models. We looked at our customer and competitor models, and many of those jobs were really in that, what we then called the middle skill area. Those jobs that require more than a high school degree, less than a college degree, and strong technical skills, because those are jobs that come with very little debt. They come with as a floor to a career, not a ceiling, and they provide that income that you need for your family, for your community, sort of back to that unfulfilled promise, as yet unfulfilled promise in the U.S. So that's really where we got focused in that, and really moved into that workforce space with some major partners like the National Governors Association, the National League of Cities, New America, and others, to drive models that are already proven and to scale those out across the U.S.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think we're going to be seeing some similar themes. So our environmental investments, strategic grant investments, really coalesced 10 years ago with the 10-year anniversary of Hurricanes Katrina, Rita. We have facilities on the Gulf Coast, and Hurricane Rita is the forgotten storm that completely devastated our community and our operations. And so 10 years ago, we made a commitment to restore coastal areas to increase resilience to storm surges, for example. So we've invested $7 million. We've committed to another $1 million this year. We have planted over 1 million trees and shrubs, picked up 500,000 pounds of trash, and restored 12,000 acres, and had over 40,000 volunteers in the last 10 years. So we're small. We don't have a sustainability department or team. So when we start, expanding our strategy to be more operational, we're looking at energy conservation and trying to work, with some of our planning departments and alternative energy. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So that's it.
Fantastic. And piggyback on that notion of small but mighty teams, which I think is the reality for many of us. I have a question for Tia. What are the internal, it's a question about internal collaboration as well as integration. And then what are the internal teams you're working with? And what is the strategy conversations you might be having to identify environmental relation and social areas to focus on?
Yeah, so probably our biggest partners are our sustainability team, which I think there are 7 or 8 people. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number, but they're based here in New York. We actually sit right next to one another, so that is super convenient. But when we look from a strategic standpoint, it is definitely close work with them. It is close work with our, for me in particular, our executive leadership team, which many of our members actually sit on the MetLife Foundation board. And then when I expand that globally, really our model around giving is as opposed to a top-down approach. So as opposed to New York says you should do this in Chile. We've created a bottom up and grassroots and grass tops, as I used to say in the nonprofit sector, and that's really important because you need teams who are on the ground, who are connected to communities, and most importantly, the employees who have a sense of what's happening. That helps in responding to disasters. We're much more, I think, effective in that nature, but also developing the strategy. So it is definitely an internal co-creative process where we will bring, and sometimes MetLife employees bring nonprofit partners to us to say, hey, you should take a look at them. Nest is one where we're doing some work with them in Latin America. But when we talk about strategy, it is that internal co-creative process. So my team and I set the overall strategy. I've allowed a lot of flexibility for the regions to make some really specific regional decisions. We're involved in that process. In LATAM in particular, a big focus on access to clean water, intersecting that with access to lands, making sure lands are rich in Brazil so that entrepreneurs that are working those lands can develop their businesses and grow it. So we've seen a theme come out of that. Planet Water Foundation has been a big partner for us in Mexico. As an example, and in EMEA, you will see a huge focus on tree planting. So Arbor Day Foundation, the Nature Conservancy in LATAM, but Arbor Day Foundation in EMEA will be a huge partner. And then in Asia, you'll see a little bit of a mix because Asia is so incredibly diverse. So it is co-creation internally with us really setting the strategy and getting buy-in. And when I say setting a strategy and getting buy-in, I mean, I spoke to like 80 colleagues across the company on strategy. So this was not done in a silo. And finally, we're evolving our strategy because we launched that in 2021. 2024 is a very different moment in time. And I think we're seeing that real time at literally as we speak. And so that means that evolution will happen again to be able to co-create that newer take on our strategy and what the markets are really seeing. They really are the experts on the ground.
That's fantastic. Would you like to add something, Shannon or David, based on your experience? My next question is for David. It's related to programs and partnerships. Could you tell us how Siemens support workforce development a little bit further, as well as how these efforts intersect sustainability and environmental initiatives, such as the creation, the training, and the...
Oh, happy to do that. Like, it's hard to shut me up sometimes on it because this is my favorite topic, but I'll stay on script here. So I mentioned our workforce focus over sort of the first 7 or 8 years, going back 10 years after we did the strategy. We went back to the board of directors about 1.5 years ago, and we're sort of uniform agreement across our executives and our foundation folks that was a good strategy, those were good investments, and a recognition that we could learn a lot from our German peers in terms of sustainability, and just felt like we probably needed to step up additionally in that area, at least in the foundation's work. And so right about that time that we were having that conversation with the board, and the board was saying, yep, let's go ahead, let's see what's out there, then the federal investments started to hit. And that is really, this is why I get so passionate about it. This is an unbelievable time in the country with $1.5 trillion redefining our economy, really putting U.S. leadership in terms of the environment and the economy and national security out there. Rebuilding roads, ports, bridges. I sound like a politician. I'm not, but it's an exciting time. But one of the reasons we find it so exciting is that there's a major opportunity or problem that we have to solve for, which is workforce. If you look at the demographics, and this is where we went deep in our research, if you look at the demographics for building or rebuilding this economy, there's no way we get there unless we do a better job of including everybody in the workforce than we have historically. We're short no matter how you play it out. We're particularly short when it comes to marginalized communities. If we don't figure out new models to include everybody, then it isn't going to work. And so our initial grants, we launched Everyone Charging Forward in the electric vehicle charging sector, a very narrow focus on manufacturing, installation, and servicing of electric vehicle chargers. Think about that role in the climate in general. Electric vehicles are 40% of the carbon issue in this country, and range anxiety is one of the huge determinants of that. And if you go back and look at the data on the demographics of who's occupying those jobs right now, they tend to be older white men. Those folks tend to be retiring and moving off out of that area. Women comprise about 2 to 3% of electricians. So there's this huge need and opportunity, right, to really pair with that. And so I won't take more of the time than I already have to talk about Everyone Charging Forward, but we've got some great partners out there in Detroit and North Carolina, and with the National League of Cities and the National Governors Association, really driving best practices in developing and scaling those models of inclusion in that electric vehicle charging space.
My next question is for Shannon. In your experience, how can companies help build climate resilience in their communities? Since I think that merges with the topic, David.
Absolutely. So, again, our Caring for Our Coast program was initially designed to increase resilience with our coastal communities, and really make sure that they're ready for, environmentally the storm surges and, have proper ways for runoff and things like that. But really what we've started to do is kind of embed environmental initiatives in a cross-cutting way. We have a disaster relief and resilience program. So every year, June 1st is the first day of hurricane season. And so we support resilience programming. So we work with the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, and they do community resiliency index sessions with local elected leaders and stakeholders together with our team. And they identify gaps environmentally of what we can address, and then we'll fund those programs. We work with SBP, which is a disaster relief organization started in New Orleans. And we just installed solar panels on one of their multi-income housing units in Houston. So not only does that provide energy reduction, but that also provides resilience for the next storm, because there will be a next storm. No matter what, there's going to be the next storm. And then finally, doing even unusual small things. We're trimming trees. We're working in our local communities to trim trees so that those who have lower socioeconomic status, they can't rebound after a tree hits their home or hits a neighbor's home. And so creating that financial resilience by doing environmental projects.
And my next question is to you and Tia, which would be, what are some of the coalitions and organizations, in addition to the Gulf organization that you just mentioned, as well as SBP, that you partner in order to execute on your strategy?
We also work with Restore America's Estuaries, and they've been an incredible partner. We do a sub-grant program with them, and they use a DEI lens in their mini grant making. They really work really hard to identify organizations that don't normally rise up in request for proposal programs and do very small environmental projects across the Gulf Coast. So they've been an incredible partner to identify those who may not be normally granted. And so they get small grants. Sorry, and of course we work with Nature Conservancy and like the bigs. We work with, we work with them too, so.
That's great. But the big ones are the ones everybody knows. We like to talk about the small organizations because there might be one that someone in the audience never heard of, and you might be in the same region. We also encourage communication after the session if you want to trade cards and so forth. And I think Tia has some examples too.
I was just I mentioned a couple. Arbor Day, Trust for Public Land, Nature Conservancy, Nest was another one. And for us, some of these partners, they are large. And they help us to work across multiple regions, which is efficient and effective for us. But also, we in mid-June will be announcing a local community impact grant program. So we're trying to identify those really grassroots nonprofit organizations that are working on the environmental causes as well. I think that's super important. So I think your point is great on that.
Hey, Caroline, I might just jump in too, and just with a little bit of a different partner to highlight as well. I mean, so much of the work in the clean economy, the green economy, it goes back to marginalized communities. How do we get more inclusive? One of our partners that we've just recently made a grant to, the Family and Workers Fund, is doing a tremendous job really addressing those wraparound gap issues. So moving from poverty to a sustainable job often requires certain investments: affordable housing, transportation, it might be a uniform, or getting pay, right, while you're being trained. Family and Workers Fund is out there, and we've joined with that coalition as well. But I think that's an issue that's increasingly getting more notice as these federal dollars hit the states move them down to the cities, et cetera. That is becoming one of the key issues.
Thank you. That's great. And our next set of questions are more related to employees and communities. So a little bit of employee engagement too, how the volunteering side of things kind of ties back to. And then question for Shannon. How do you engage your employees in socially oriented environmental efforts? I know you mentioned the planting of 1 million trees. That's fascinating. And then how do you make that connection between their actions, your giving, and the company sustainability efforts?
So 10 years ago, we kicked off this program, and it was more of a voluntold situation where we're going to create these amazing events, and you're going to come and have a great time. But in the last 10 years, the employees now own it. You know, we have an organization called Team CITGO. It's actually led by our employees, and they identify the organizations and the events that they want to volunteer in. And then I align my giving with the organizations that they're interested in. That's one. And two, I embed volunteer money in all of our grants so that there isn't, you know, the onus is not on the organization, or, you know, it's just budgeted, it's built in so that our partners can actually host us and the community and our families. And every one of our environmental volunteer events has some educational component. So you talk about the impact of what you're doing, you see what you're doing, you touch what you're doing, and it really makes a difference in terms of building the next generation of those, you know, who are stewarding our environment. So that's one. And then two, we're Energy Star. Our facilities have Energy Star, so we do an Energy Awareness Month. And our employees kind of drive that celebration of, you know, energy efficiency, energy awareness, you know, so trying to reduce our footprint in energy. And so, you know, stickers are a big thing. You know, like our employees love to put stickers on their hard hats. So we also engage them in that way too.
That's great. That's great. David, next question for you related to the communications employee as well. From a telling a story perspective, how does your environmental giving fit in your overall sustainability story that's shared internally as well as externally, since you're a global organization?
Yeah. Looking at Lauren, one of my colleague who's here from Siemens, it's a good question. It's an evolving, like most of us in the room, right? It's an evolving answer. But certainly when you think about the products that I described earlier, Siemens is really proud, right? When you go back to our story of decarbonization, we were one of the first corporations to commit to going carbon neutral by 2030. The products that I described earlier really are sort of at the center of this clean economy. And so that's all, you know, a huge part of the message that is out and about the world, and it's an authentic message. That's the beautiful part of this, is if you talk to employees at Siemens, that's what's really driving them day in and day out. So I think what we're doing through the Everyone Charging Forward initiative really opens doors in lots of different places. So we're telling this story. We're close with Department of Energy, Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, the White House, a number of others who are driving this same network, right? The same dialogue of U.S. policy. So that's a huge part of what's happening out there, and that's a great benefit, right? That's some reflected glory for Siemens as a whole. If we go out to our employees, we work with our employee groups, employee resource groups quite closely to tell the story, whether it's in the environmental area or the health equity area. That's a big part of it as well. It's part of our brand, reputation, and we obviously draw as much as we can from our business leaders as well to draw off their knowledge of what's happening in the electric vehicle space, right? We're the foundation, there's no direct benefit, but we want to know who they know. We want to talk to their competitors. We're working with unions as well, and that's all part of sort of the overall dialogue.
Fantastic. Tia, would you like to add something to that?
I think my panelists said it well. I'll only add one or two other things. Employee engagement and volunteerism is so important because those are an additional 45,000 voices that really help to amplify the work that the company and the philanthropic investment is doing and impacting our communities positively. I will just take we have hands-on volunteering, but we're also looking at the pro bono or skills-based and how that can help our partners, especially in this space, support them from an infrastructure, a human capital, leveraging the expertise and passion of employees to help them take their work further faster, of course. So that is an important aspect of the work and how we lean into that work moving forward. So we'll be launching some programming this summer, but my hope and also learning from my peers here in terms of how they're engaging their employees and thinking about what other dynamic ways can we create for our communities and our colleagues year round in this work. But that it's so critical, and it's very critical, especially from a talent perspective, retaining and attracting new talent. They want to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and with multiple generations in the workforce, we all want, to be part of what's happening at our company, but also in our communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. With that said, I'll have one last question, then Q&A. How do you, and the last question is for all three of you, how do you anticipate your environmental sustainability giving changing in the coming years? Any big swings?
I'm hoping it will increase. It is our CEO's favorite strategic grant program, and we're trying to embed it across other ways, across our other focus areas in education, disaster relief, resilience, and in even health. So I think everything is connected, and so trying to find those deeper connections to drive impact. Because honestly, we're looking at, for us, it's resilience, right? The bottom line is creating a resilient community that can better withstand the next event.
I'm hopeful that as we have rolled out in the foundation this work that I just described, that we can now layer on. I would put that sort of in the strategic philanthropy framework, but above that is a shared value framework, right? So there's so many different opportunities here to layer on this drive towards equity in the environment. Product donations is a good example, right? We can do a lot better work on product donations. The community colleges and technical schools that we work with, philanthropically or from a business standpoint, are repeatedly saying, you want us to train all these folks, but we don't have the equipment to train on, which is to some degree been a supply side or a supply channel issue. But that's a good example where, as a sector or as a company, we can really drive different change. I think the company can also look at a whole bunch of other corporate citizenship investments in local communities with community colleges and technical schools that learn from the models that are being developed at the society writ large, right? That's a way for us to bring in more of our DEI goals, to have a different workforce than we do now. Sort of the opportunities to glom on to the model that's already been started, to me, seem endless. So that's my hope.
I would say, one, the evolution of our strategy will enable us to, I'm hopeful, bring in more folks across the enterprise in terms of understanding the importance of the moment that we're in now. You have an election happening, you've got ongoing crises already, so there's a lot to continue to review, to bake in, to consider, that causes you to have to be nimble and flexible. We're looking at scenario planning, and then also being proactive. So that may be in a disaster response, which we've more responded instead of being proactive, being more proactive. It's something we're starting in EMEA and LATAM, and we'll expand to Asia. I'm hopeful in terms of how we pre-position money or partners so that we can more respond much more quickly. As we all know, or many of us may know, that can be a very fraught moment in time when you're trying to figure out what needs to happen. But I think we can be more proactive, and then proactive in terms of how do we help our communities and the people that they're serving be resilient against some of the environmental impacts that they're facing. So what can we do to be proactive, to put money into their pockets and help them be resilient? Because when there's a disaster, for example, not only are just everyone is hurting, including some of the organizations that are serving. What does that look like from an infrastructure, a technology, a personnel, a people? But how can we be more proactive going in? So for us, it's proactive, it's scenario planning, it's the strategic element of it globally that we're undertaking. And that will make the difference for us, I think.
Fantastic, absolutely. So big themes here: scenario planning, resilience, community investing, with a focus on upskilling. And with that said, I'll open the floor to Q&A. We have about 5 minutes. Any questions, anyone? Please go ahead.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Alexandra Scuro from Bank of America. I don't know that this is really working. I will speak strongly. I actually took a picture in the last room of the average program area allocations for 2023, and environment was 5%. And I'm really just curious, given your experience in building out your programs, do you see that 5% across all corporations changing, going up, going down? If it stays the same or goes down, what do you think are the factors that would influence that?
I would say for us, for the Resilient Communities portfolio, of which that includes physical and mental well-being, environmental causes, and arts and culture, it is about 24% of our overall spend, and it is, if I remember correctly, the largest spend we have in that portfolio. I see it as increasing, but I would say that there's a lot in that ecosystem of spending and those are some of the things I spoke to. So that's kind of where we're at, but I would imagine it's going to grow.
Yeah, and I saw those slides too, and when we filled out the survey, the issue came up. Maybe everybody's. I mean, you could put what we do in a lot of different categories, right? So I think there's a little bit of an issue for all of us in how we're capturing and interpreting the data. So the workforce issues that we get behind, right? A lot of it could go in healthcare from a health equity standpoint. It could go in economic development. It could go in environment. So you end up making a little bit of a random. I think we pushed a little harder on the environment just because we wanted to see it show up there. So maybe we put 60% and 40% in other areas with a good faith estimate. But I think that is a little bit of what's going on with there. The direct answer to your question is we're doing way more in environment, right? We've really moved from doing probably under 10% to doing more than 70% of our grants in that area. So I think it's increasing.
No. Any other questions from the audience? Anybody would like to ask a question?
Here we come.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gina Upshaw. I'm from Macquarie Group Foundation. I lead staff engagement in the Americas. This question, Tia, is for you. Curious about your work in Latin America, and you were talking about the intersection between water and land access equity. Are there any organizations on the ground that you can just name off the top of your head that you guys have been partnering with that have been particularly beneficial for that work?
Sure. So two that I mentioned, one is NEST.
Yes.
And then the other is the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a multi-country project in Latin America. And that was 2 years, I think it's 2 years, 1.5 million. and Nest is, I can't remember the exact number for that, but happy to get you details on that. And it may be in the 2022 sustainability report. They might have been highlighted.
Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Well, I have the mic. Oh, here's one.
Hi, I'm Carrie Santos from Citizens. I'm the Director of Corporate Giving. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you hit on shared value. So more along, besides sort of getting executive buy-in, what types of projects and opportunities have you worked on within business lines? And what types of projects and opportunities do you think might crop up in the future?
Let me go back to saying that where we are right now is really in a strategic philanthropy space. And we've been working in there for about 10 years. I would say just, from an overall context, we report to Germany. Philanthropy in Germany is really different, right? So over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of education and trust being developed here that, hey, there's a way to do this that the U.S. actually does pretty well in terms of aligning philanthropy. Again, the same grants we would be making if we were at the Ford Foundation or Kaiser or whatever, but there has been a 10-year development here of sort of saying, hey, we're moving from what I would call charitable giving to aligned philanthropy, right? What do we know? How do we leverage the assets? And this next stage that I'm hopeful about is shared value. And I think that stage, we're getting more traction with our German counterparts right now who are interested in sort of how we're doing things and what we're doing. But I think it goes back to all sorts of different things where the company could come in and place value. I mentioned product donations. That's a huge opportunity. I was at Medtronic leading philanthropy there for years. That was one of the first places we went to, right? It's like you have all this product when you can get your tax and donations group and say, hey, guess what? We can do really good stuff and actually save you a little money on the bottom line. Then that really takes off and starts to build partnerships. I think there's some opportunities within the sector to pull together automobile manufacturers, our competitors, unions, and others to say, hey, great that you guys are working with EVITP and MUST and the IBEW in Detroit. That's cool. But how do we take this and make this a standardized model so that we have workers around the country going through the same training? That means that job is portable. That means their access to it is, fairly unlimited for years going forward. And it sort of goes on and on. I mentioned the workforce training in particular markets that we're in. We have some big investments, new investments in North Carolina and Texas. Those would be great places for our corporate peers to come in and say, hey, good models. Let's look at how we get more marginalized communities involved in this and roll it forward that way. So I think it's kind of unlimited.
That's great.
I just want to quickly add on, it's a journey, executive buy-in and integrating across business lines, making sure people know what you're doing, how you can help. So it is a challenge, at least in for me. And so I insert myself, it's, there's this culture of we do it because it's the right thing to do. And I'm standing there saying it helps our bottom line, right? So I'm here to help your bottom line, and I will insert myself into like this Energy Star campaign and add on with other education opportunities and engaging our employees around that, or even around we're putting in solar panels at our facilities, and then also doing solar projects in our community.
That's wonderful. And with that said, I would like to transition to the table discussions. We have a few minutes left. And the way we're going to structure, you don't need to report back to us. It's just an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to someone next to you and go over some of the questions that we selected. And I also encourage our panelists, if you want to join any of the tables, please go ahead. And I don't know if we have enough time for all the questions, but maybe select one or two that you think it's appropriate to table based on your industry or based on your expertise. Since we have so many senior leaders in the room, we'd like to encourage a little panel discussion and then closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining the panel.